Okay, next question. A couple of guys I'd like to hear your thoughts on. Richard Marcinko,
Marcinko,
and Henry Rollins.
Marcinko, and Rollins. So let's start off with Dick Marcinko, Demo Dick Marcinko, who, if you don't know who that is, he was a SEAL in Vietnam, a SEAL officer in Vietnam. He was the founder of SEAL Team 6. He created SEAL Team 6. He ended up getting in trouble with the Navy, and they kind of did a witch hunt on him, and he was eventually, he did a little bit of jail time. They found that he had falsified some travel records and maybe some money, but they found stuff on him. But it was kind of trivial stuff that was trumped up. And they forced him out of the military. And he wrote a book in the early 90s, because it showed up in the SEAL teams right around when I got actually through BUD/S and into the SEAL teams. So it was sometime around 1990 or 1991. He wrote a book called Rogue Warrior. And it did amazingly well, sold a lot of copies. And it definitely broke the mold of this idea of the quiet professional, which was how I was most certainly raised in the SEAL teams. And it's something that I've obviously contradicted now, because wrote a book with Leif, have this podcast, I've been on TV. So I've definitely broke the paradigm of the quiet professional. I absolutely try to respect the spirit of the quiet professional. And I'm not, even if the book that Leif and I wrote isn't a book about our triumphs and everything we did great, it's a book about what we learned usually from bad situations and humbling experience. That's what the book is about. And it's an effort to pass on leadership lessons learned that we learned in a humbling way. So there's that. But Richard Marcinko, from my perspective in the SEAL teams, and again, this was right when I came in, he was kind of the guy that broke this mold. And of course, there's been, dozens and dozens of quote unquote SEAL books now. But he wrote the first one, very well received, and definitely got some flack from the SEAL community. And that is what it is. Now I worked for guys that worked for him, that literally were, he was their commanding officer. And I remember one of them, I said to this one senior guy that had been a ton of experience, and I said, you worked for Marcinko. How was he? And he looked at me with no hesitation and said, best commanding officer I ever had. And I heard that everybody I ever asked just about told me that the only people that you'd hear anything different from would be senior officers, that he was, he'd be over the top. He didn't quite play the game. But there's no doubt about it. He was a tough guy. He was a hardcore guy. And the guys that worked for him respected him and liked him. The thing that I learned from him was seeing how that transition took place, and how the thing that got him to where he was, to get that responsibility of creating SEAL Team 6, which was this elite counter-terrorist part of the Navy. Obviously he was trusted and he was liked and he was respected. And so I saw that he had gotten himself to that level, which is very cool. But I also saw, and again, this is a topic that comes up a lot, our strengths are often our biggest weaknesses. And so this kind of cowboy mentality, this aggressive mentality that he had, it got him there. But once he got there, it doesn't seem like he was able to rein that back in. And that is something that I became cognizant of. Because no doubt when I was a younger guy, when I was a young SEAL and then a young SEAL officer, I was definitely fairly cowboyish. And as I moved up the ranks, I recognized that I had to mature and I had to grow up and I had to do things differently. I couldn't do the same things that I did when I was a young platoon guy as I could. I had to tighten it up when I became a young officer, and then I became a platoon commander, and then I became a task unit commander, and I had to grow up, for lack of a better word. And looking back, I should have grown up even more, but you don't see that at the time. So that's something that I learned from Marcinko, even though I never worked for him, and I met him a handful of times, but never spent any actual time with him. But I have also seen this exact same thing with business leaders, with CEOs, especially with CEOs that come into a company that is not doing well. And there's only one kind of person that can turn that company around. Somebody with a dynamic personality, someone with a vision, someone that's going to kick down doors, somebody that's going to make things happen. And you see those guys go in there and they get that done. And they turn those companies around. And then the real test comes is, can they transition from being that cowboy to being that company person, to being that straight shooter, straight and narrow, that takes the company then from survival to thrive. And some of them make it and some of them don't. And I look at Dick Marcinko as a cautionary tale to everybody that comes up through the ranks and gets to that point where you need to take it to the next level, and how you have to change. What got you there is not going to be what keeps you there. You have to change and you have to adapt and grow. And so I think that's important to recognize. And it's important to constantly be looking around for examples and saying, okay, I saw what happened there, and try and push yourself forward. So that's my, I don't want to say my opinion, because it's not really my opinion. Those are my thoughts on Demo Dick Marcinko, the Rogue Warrior. The other one is Henry Rollins. And if you don't know who Henry Rollins is, he was a young kid from the DC area who grew up in the punk rock scene in DC, went to a military academy, and eventually, even though he was kind of just a kid, at some point, a band called Black Flag, who was a incredible band led by a guitarist named Greg Ginn, they asked Rollins, who was just a fan, who had jumped on the stage at some point and sang one of their songs. They said, hey, they had a falling out, or I forget what happened with their first singer, but the first singer wasn't singing anymore. They needed a new singer. They asked Rollins to try out. Rollins jumped on the opportunity and took that gig and ended up being the lead singer of the band Black Flag, who is a really pivotal band in American rock and roll. And I think he took, Black Flag to a whole new level. And I've talked about this on Tim Ferriss, and I'll talk about it again. But there was an album called Black Flag, My War, which is an incredible album. And it's especially an incredible album. And for those of you that listen, for those of you youngins out there, the records used to come on a piece of vinyl, and there was two sides to it. And so this Black Flag album called My War had two sides to it. And the first side sounded fairly similar to what most of Black Flag sounded like prior to that, which is just sort of punk rock, fast beat, whatever. Side two was this slowed down, heavy, dredging, powerful music, and the whole side is like that. And that side of that album was on my record player when I was, 13 or 14 years old for like a year. That's all I listened to. And I really related to it because it just was something that this heavy, this introspective, this this aggression and anger was something that when I heard it for the first time, I was like, oh, that's what I think. That's what my mind is filled with. And this was sort of the next thing that came after Black Sabbath for me, because Black Sabbath was the first thing I said, okay, that's heavy and that's dark, and I understand. I relate to that. The happy music that I was hearing, I didn't understand that. I didn't relate to it. That heavy stuff, when I heard that, this dark stuff, I related to it and I understood it, and it fueled me. And so Rollins, Black Flag, My War, Side 2 definitely had a big impact on me. And then from there, eventually he was out of Black Flag and he formed his own band, and they made an epic record, which is called Lifetime. Just again, this hit me at an age where, what was I, 16? And here comes this album called Lifetime that was very powerful, very raw, very hard. And I can't imagine a better sound coming into my ears when I was 15 or 16 years old than this album Lifetime. So myself and my buddies at the time, we were listening to Rollins. And again, these were songs about power. These were songs about, as a matter of fact, the cover of the Lifetime album was two hands gripping the earth. And it was, this message of, at least that's how I interpreted it. That's the thing you got to remember. I was a kid and I'm hearing this stuff and I'm overlaying what my thoughts of the world are on top of it. It sounded aggressive to me. It sounded tough to me. And that's what my mind was like at the time. And so I put what I wanted it to, I made it what I wanted it to be. And to me, two hands holding the earth was a powerful symbol of, I'm going to take over the world. I'm going to control the world. I'm going to make things happen. So we actually, when I was a kid, we actually followed Rollins around. And we would, he'd play, this was in, I want to say this was like 88 or 89, but myself and my buddies we were all into Rollins, and we went and I probably saw him play 10 or 15 times on the Eastern Seaboard. Maybe it wasn't 10, maybe it was 10 times. And this is back in the day. This is, he's playing in clubs that are the size of your living room, and we'd help them unload their instruments and we'd help them offload and we'd hang out with them afterwards. And it was great. It was cool. And that was my experience. And I think that had a big impact on me. Another thing, I gotta mention this about that album Lifetime, in between the songs, if you look at vinyl records and there's a space in between the songs, and there's like a standard, I don't know what, there's a standard of 2 millimeters, let's say. And when I first got that Lifetime record, the space in between the songs, you could see it was tiny. And that's because the one song would end and boom, the other song, after a moment of silence, boom, the next song would kick in. And that's what the album was like, this intense, just driving, getting after it. So we would go to those shows and we would just go completely nuts and get our insane mosh pit destruction on. So out of that, spawned this. And the other thing was cool is, Rollins was, we were not into drinking, we were not into drugs, and neither was Rollins. So he was this kind of, and we'd see Rollins doing push-ups before the shows, and we'd say, oh yeah, this guy's like us, I relate to this guy because I want to be strong, and I don't want to do drugs, and I'm staying clean, and he's staying clean, and so we had this good thing going. But again, this is my 15-year-old brain.
Right.
And so what happens? So I took all that to mean that's the way life is. For instance, Rollins has a big tattoo on his back that says search and destroy. Okay. I took that literally, okay, I need to search and destroy. How do you do that? Okay. What is the most hardcore thing? What is the most physical thing? How do you get control? How do you be aggressive in the nth degree? You know how you do it? You be a commando. And so those weird twisted interpretations of my mind said to me, okay, that means you need to be a commando. And that's what I did. That's how that's one of the I would say, one of those factors that led me onto the path that I'm here today. So went through SEAL training, and actually, interestingly, the first Lollapalooza tour, and we'd have to Google this and see when this was, but it was the first Lollapalooza, and Rollins was playing, and they played down in somewhere in San Diego. Lollapalooza came, and I went. And I didn't want to pay for it for whatever reason. So I went backstage and I waited until I saw Rollins. And I saw Rollins and I said, "Hey, Rollins." And he said, "Hey." And you could see he kind of recognized me. I mean, he recognized me. Went over, said hi. And I said, "Hey, can you get me into the show?" And I got a couple buddies with me. And he said, "It'd be easier to get you into Fort Knox." It was kind of weird because back in the day, we would sit there and hang out with him and help him load his van and walk right in. And it was just really cool to have that much interaction with somebody that you were into. I mean, you can't do that normally. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, there it was. Now he's in Lollapalooza. And even though he's on tour and he doesn't know anybody there, there's a guy there, me, and I can't get in. Mm-hmm. So it was, it was cool. But it was definitely a sign to me that things were a little different now. Mm. And he had kind of made it, right? I guess he'd made it now. And he ended up having he had some bigger records that did better than Lifetime. But the way it kind of continues, the way this story continues is that Rollins was a guy when I was a kid that talked about Vietnam vets. And if you read any of his, he used to write books, and I'd read his books, and he would talk about Vietnam vets and how this guy taught him so much about discipline, and then he'd talk about, he had this tattoo, this search and destroy, and in his books or in his shows, he would talk about the violence and the fights and all these things, and he even talked about like missions. Remain calm. Prepare to destroy. That's from a song. That's from a Henry Rollins song. Remain calm, prepare to destroy. So he kind of had this thing that I thought was cool when I was 14. And then I actually went and I did this stuff. I actually went and did the stuff that he had talked about and that he spent his career talking about. And so all of a sudden, this connection, this sort of, this connection that I had with him, all of a sudden it kind of faded because I looked at it from a different light, as it was no longer me looking at someone thinking, this guy's done this cool stuff. It was actually starting to look at him thinking he didn't do this cool stuff. And now I think when I see him now, and it's weird, I think he's about 10 years older than me, maybe 12 years older than me. So I can kind of see it's a little bit of a glimpse into the future, because you see a guy that's certain years older than you, and you know what he looked like when he was 25, and you know what he looked like when he was 35 and 45, and now he's probably 55. And I can see what he looks like and what he did look like. So I see him now, and he seems to be a result of that life that he ended up with, which is Hollywood and kind of famous and kind of being in movies and being a rock star. And I don't have the same, like I said, connection that I did. But like I said, when I was a kid, when I was 13 years old, when I was 14 years old, when I was 15 years old, I definitely took some things from him and applied them to my life. And I'd love to meet up with him. I know he lives up in LA, and if at some point, Hank, if you're listening, let me know. Let's link up. We'll talk about the old times. But